Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're talking about the French president getting a royal welcome. First Western head of state to be a guest of honor at a GCC, that's the Gulf Cooperation Council summit that's taking place Tuesday in the Saudi capital. With us to talk about it, Olivier Delage of sister station Radio France International and the author of Geopolitics of Saudi Arabia. We're also in the company of the former French ambassador to Iran, François Nicoulot, who said to us during the break that he thinks if he was a betting man, there's a good chance that there is going to be an Iran nuclear deal at the end, before the end of next month.
Yes, there is a good chance because there is a dynamic, which is playing at the moment. It's true that Obama wants a deal, Obama and Kerry want a deal, the Iranians want a deal. Of course, there are some very difficult questions still, and in particular the question of sanction and the phasing of the lifting of the sanction.
Okay, but overall it's looking pretty good, you're saying.
Yes.
Joining us from Dubai, Gulf analyst Theodore Karadzic. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you.
And welcome back to Tony Badran of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, who joins us from New York City. Before the break, part one of our discussion, Olivier Delage mentioning the last foreign head of state to attend a GCC summit was the Iranian president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Those were different times, back in 2007.
Yeah, and I would not call him a guest of honor. He was invited by the host of the conference, the Emir of Qatar, and he did attend the summit, but that's about it. The important thing here is that Hollande has been invited formally as a guest of honor to that GCC summit, whose only purpose, the summit, is to prepare the meeting with Obama next week. So the meaning is very different.
Before the break, we were talking about Iran's influence in the region. How about Gulf influence and Gulf influence here? We're headed towards a second crowning of Paris Football Club, Paris Saint-Germain, as French champions, which is now owned by the Qataris. That's, I guess, the most visible example of that Gulf influence right now here in France.
Yes, there are many investments from the Gulf states in France. But let's talk about Qatar for 1 second, because it has been so much written and talked about in the past few years. France is only the fourth in terms of Qatar investment in Europe, after the UK, Switzerland, and I'm not sure about, and Germany, I think. So, yes, and there is Saudi money, there is Kuwaiti money, and all kind of investments, sometimes just financial, sometimes in buildings, but also in industry. And we actually, as a country, need foreign capital to be invested, and that's what's happening.
Theodore Karadzic, what's the street cred, if you will, of the French where you are?
Well, France is seen as a reliable partner, as we've all been talking about. There is definitely a buzz going around about the role that France plays. There's also an important point here, too, about counterterrorism. The Gulf states, and particularly the UAE, look at France in terms of its counterterrorism capabilities and see that as a way to pursue bilateral relationships. I'm sorry to concentrate a little bit more heavily on defense issues, but it is important. And that's here, what really bothers the GCC states about this agreement with Iran is that it says absolutely nothing about ballistic missile and cruise missile threats from Iran. And that is where MBDA comes in, because MBDA is potentially the company that will provide or win contract rather for providing air defense systems for the GCC states. And of course, the goal is to have it interoperational. I think that this is where some of this is about the French defense industry. But besides Rafale, what else can France provide in defense arena?
Thales proposing the sale Mark III air defense systems.
Yes, very well. But to put things in perspective, let us remember that Iran spends about $10 billion per year on defense. Saudi Arabia spends $50 billion, more than $50 billion. And if you take the whole Gulf countries, it comes up to $100 billion. So 10 times what Iran spends on defense. It's difficult, considering this figure, to think that Iran really is a big threat to the countries of the region, to the countries of the Arabian Peninsula.
However, that said, there is a civil war right now going on the border with Saudi Arabia. Later on this Monday, the French president will be meeting with, I guess we can call him the exiled Yemeni president, who is in Riyadh. The French providing satellite intelligence to that coalition, which the U.S. as well is backing.
Absolutely.
At this particular point in time, how much will Yemen weigh on the minds, both when there's this GCC summit that takes place Tuesday and next week at Camp David?
It's difficult to say. I mean, speaking about Yemen and Iran, I mean, Iran has been accused to finance the Houthi, the rebel, which is true, most probably true, to having provided weapons and so on. But in fact, I mean, when you consider that the other side has been helped also by Saudi Arabia, frankly, the Yemeni question is basically it's a local. I mean, it's a local crisis. The Houthis were not invented by the Iranians. They were there much before, and they will be after anything that Iran can do. And to consider that this is a crisis, I mean, engineered by Iran is, I believe, making a grossly erroneous evaluation.
Tony Bedran?
Well, I think one of the things that we saw in Yemen speaks to some of the issues that Mr. Karasik has talked about as well. The bottom line is the principal fear of the Gulf states with regard to Iran is less its conventional capabilities than its asymmetrical ones, especially its security penetration of Arab countries, and as we saw specifically in Yemen. So one of the main issues that the Saudi coalition went after in Yemen has been rockets and longer range rockets that presumably come from Iran and would threaten Saudi Arabian security. So when the United States, the Obama administration comes up and says that we are willing to defend Saudi Arabia and the Gulf from external aggression like the first Gulf War, let's say. Well, I don't think that necessarily Saudi Arabia is concerned about a ground invasion by Iranian forces that would necessitate a U.S. intervention. I think their concerns are very different.
Olivier Zalage?
Well, for the Saudis, Yemen is a domestic issue, not an international one, to start with. Second, the Saudis have been meddling in Yemeni affairs from the beginning.
I'll just interrupt you here. You say a domestic one. Another country's just joined the coalition, Senegal, to send 2,100 troops.
Good for them. But it would be very unwise for any of them, including and chiefly the Saudis, to put a foot on the Yemeni soil, because they know that this is a war they cannot win. I mean, everyone in the region remembers what happened in the 60s. Then it was the Egyptians who tried to send soldiers by tens of thousands. It was their Vietnam. Then the Saudis were supporting the Zaidis. At the time, they were not calling them Shias. So, I mean, you see, it's a very complex situation. The Saudis have been pouring money, sending weapons, supporting this and that, changing alliance, a bit like Syria is doing in Lebanon. But they cannot win that war, and everyone knows it.
Which brings us to another major topic, which is François Hollande is in Riyadh, the first head of state, foreign head of state to go there since this major reshuffle that took place last week. The new king replacing his crown prince and his deputy crown prince. Deputy crown prince, 30 years of age, who is also the defense minister, Mohammed bin Salman. And he's the one who's been in charge of the operation in Yemen, an operation which is not going very well, apparently.
Well, this is not what you read in Saudi press. But, of course, I mean, everyone there will tell you, let's declare victory and pull out of this mess. The problem is that the political goals which have been stated, none of them have been achieved. None of them. So if the French and the Americans have supported that war, it is chiefly not to cut ties with the main Sunni powers in the regions, because they want them on board to fight the Islamic State.
Do you agree with that, Theodore Karadzic? It's not so much that they agree, the French and the Americans, with the aims and the strategy of the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. It's that they need these Gulf states on board to fight IS.
I think the situation is that the U.S. and France do need the Gulf states to fight Daesh, or the Islamic State. At the same time, they are surprised by the Saudi moves in Yemen. This plan to go into Yemen was briefed to the Americans a few months ago before it started. And basically the message back to the Saudis was, well, if you break it, you own it, which is they do anyway. So given that there was an opportunity to go and show this new, what's called the Salman Doctrine, and to boost the bona fides of Prince Mohammed bin Salman, they decided to go for it. And yes, you can read the Saudi press about the positive developments. It is going in stages. It's sloppy, but it's important because the Saudis have always have tried to learn lessons, go to Western military schools, read doctrine and practice and so on. And the day has finally come when the Saudis think they can stand up and lead a coalition and do this. I think it's baby steps, and it could add very badly for the Saudis, but at the same time, they learn lessons. So I think that's the value here. And yes, U.S. and France seem to be reluctantly going along, but they need these countries for a bigger issue, which is the Islamics.
So Theodore, if you're a proverbial fly on the wall next week at Camp David, what are you going to be hearing when those Gulf leaders sit down with Barack Obama?
Well, I think that we need to first see who really goes. There is some talk about certain countries who aren't going to send their top leaders. That might be telling. The second is that the GCC states don't want to be lectured. I'm hearing too much here from certain individuals about we've had enough of the talk, we want to see some action. They're going to want more security guarantees. And I think we got a pretty good hint, and it hasn't been brought up in the show, but about His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, when he went to the White House last week to talk with Obama about what the UAE requires in terms of this agreement with Iran, which everybody here thinks is going to be signed very soon in June. So the fly on the wall is probably it's going to be more of a photo op than anything else. That's the perspective from Dubai.
François Nicolau, do the Americans get a bit preachy? I mean, I know John Kerry's going there this weekend. Do they have a tendency to lecture?
Yes, probably. This is an old story, and the United States represent the biggest democracy. They feel entitled to give lessons to the whole world. We're used to that, and we can incorporate this. This is not something which could create so many problems. The one thing which will be certainly at the heart of the conversations in Camp David will be precisely the Iranian agreement, an agreement with Iran. And I believe that Obama will try to convince his partners that it's a good thing that Iran can sign such an agreement. If there is no agreement, it is true that Iran will be much freer to dash to the bomb or to dash to the capacity to have the bomb. And but I believe this can be understood, in fact, by the kingdoms of the Arabian Peninsula. I believe they're a bit nervous before the deal, but I believe that when they're going to see the deal, I mean, they should understand that this is probably the best solution that can be, frankly. And one has.
So let me bring in Tony Bedran on that. Tony, once a deal is signed, Gulf monarchs, will they? I don't know. Will they say, well, the sun will continue to rise?
Well, it's going to make the region, I think, far more dangerous than it already is. There's a lot of talk that you've heard about that this, and the Saudis have made similar statements that whatever the Iranians get, they want as well. So if the Iranians get their nuclear program, the Saudis will want theirs as well. In fact, some will say half jokingly that maybe they'll beat the Iranians to the bomb already to get us direct access to a bomb from the Pakistanis, perhaps. But regardless, I think the last thing that anyone wants is to put a regime like the Iranian regime on a path towards being a breakout or threshold nuclear state, let alone to have that proliferate beyond Iran in the region. And it still doesn't address the principal issue of the continued Iranian subversiveness in the entire Middle East, from the Mediterranean to the Gulf of Aden.
All right, disagreement on that point. There's one other point which has been brought up a lot in the French press, and that is that the way that François Hollande is going there, and there's no mention being made, we're talking about preachiness on the part of the Americans, there's no mention being made of human rights. For Olivier Darage, Sweden's left-wing foreign minister, back in March, created a huge storm. Margaret Wallström called time on a long-running tradition of supplying weapons to Saudi Arabia. She denounced the flogging of bloggers, the death penalty, the treatment of women. France has a socialist president, and that's not going to be very high on the dinner table conversation tonight.
Not long after the election of François Hollande, the French Foreign Ministry published communiques criticizing the use of death penalty in Saudi Arabia. Lately, you have not heard that kind of thing.
And yet last week we saw the outcry against the death penalty in Indonesia.
Yeah. But not in Saudi Arabia. You're not likely to hear it anymore for some time. It remains to be seen as if tonight, privately, François Hollande will raise the issue of Raif Badawi, that blogger who nearly died from the first floggings he got. It's possible. But no, France is no longer in the preaching mode as far as human rights is concerned in the Middle East.
François Nicolau, your thoughts on that?
Again, I believe that you have internal politics and external politics are two different things. Of course, I mean, France presents itself as the mother of human rights. I mean, there are several fathers of human rights, but we are happy to say that to the world. But when it comes to precise cases and in public diplomacy, because as you said, quite accurately, I mean, it's not because you don't make big declaration about it that you don't speak about it. And I'm fairly confident that Hollande can speak precisely about Badawi, but you can say everything, even to the Saudis, it's the way of saying it, If you're saying a certain way, you can have sometimes, it's not always the case, but in most cases, better result than in making big public declarations.
Yeah, I think it is true. And somehow, you can refer that to the Rafale deal. I mean, the previous president was boasting that an agreement would be concluded and no agreement was signed. This administration has been quiet and agreements have been signed. I mean, that shows a different way of conducting policy as well.
All right, but selling Rafales is one thing, but again, this whole human rights question, that is another.
Yes, because frankly, if you castigate the Saudis publicly it's good for the newspapers and the TV shows, but I'm not sure it's going to be very effective. They will just stiffen up and say we are not going to be lectured by a foreign country. So it's all a balancing act. The result will tell if something happened or not.
The result will tell if something happens or not. I want to thank our panelists for being with us here in the France 24 debate. François Niccolot. I want to thank Olivier Darage, also Theodore Karadzic for being with us from Dubai, Tony Badran in New York City. Stay with us because our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. We're looking at the press reaction to François Hollande's visit to Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Le Monde had a pretty interesting article this afternoon, quite critical of François Hollande for the perhaps deal that was struck for selling the Rafale fighters, perhaps at the expense of Air France. It seems that extra routes were opened up for Qatar Airways, landing in, I believe, Toulouse and Nice. And some feel that this is could cost Air France quite a lot at a time when the company is trying to
and is about to announce new layoffs.
That's right, and it could also see perhaps Paris as a hub being replaced for certain connections with Abu Dhabi or other areas such as that. So some feeling that this sets a dangerous precedent, especially when there could be further sales of Rafale fighters with the United Arab Emirates, and Emirates Airlines could indeed perhaps request a similar deal for their airline to have extra routes, perhaps at the expense of Air France. Bearing in mind that the French state is a shareholder, I believe 18%. So some saying that that's a surprising deal to have struck for Air France at Air France's expense. Others criticising François Hollande for heading to Saudi Arabia when he hasn't confirmed yet his attendance at the Victory Day parade in Moscow that will commemorate the victory over Nazi Germany. To attend or not to attend, some saying, where are the priorities of the French president in this regard? In any case, so I think I've pretty much lifted more criticism than anything else from the press, but it is certainly present. François Hollande, however, being congratulated here for being more successful than Nicolas Sarkozy in having concluded sales deals for Rafale fighters. Nicolas Sarkozy finding it very difficult at the time to seal those deals. But for now, India and Qatar, as well as Egypt, have agreed to purchase the French fighter jets.
That's an important point. I just want to turn to you once more. Has France struck good deals with this whole row over Air France, and also Olivier Darage, the issue of again those Rafales sold to Egypt with Saudi financing, and everybody's wondering, what do they have to give in return?
Who? The French? I think as far as Egypt is concerned, the only concession from the French government was to recognize Egypt as a democratic country where an election took place and so on. For Qatar, I don't know.
I sense a bit of irony in your voice there.
Well, a few months earlier, the tone was more critical from the French government. Obviously, the Rafale deal has changed the whole thing.
Has changed the tone.
Yeah.
So certainly more successful than Nicolas Sarkozy in terms of sealing those deals, as the RFI website points out. Others saying, with tongue firmly in cheek, I think, Francois, he's been an excellent arms dealer or an arms salesman, perhaps better than he has been a president. I think that's perhaps a little bit unfair, but it does...
Including to dictators, it says.
Right, indeed. But it does seem quite a long time ago since we were seeing in the aftermath of the Paris attacks and the boost that François Hollande saw to his ratings. That does seem like quite a long time ago. The more recent polls are saying that his bilan, or I suppose his record, is negative for 81%
popularity,
of French people.
81% unfavorable ratings.
That's right, at the moment. So there you go, some being critical of this tour to Qatar and Saudi Arabia.
All right, we'll see how it plays out when he comes home. Many thanks, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.